You're listening to Contesting Wrestling Minisode number 26. Six. Yes, thank you. No, I wasn't turning that into like a sexy thing.
20. Time is meaningless.
Time doesn't mean anything. Oh, we're recording this on April, what's the date?
13th.
13th.
Yeah.
I don't know
yeah,
anymore,
in case
man.
it's like inappropriate to release this on the tape. Released it, who knows? And we are reflecting on our episode about Ronald the Kill. True things.
Something like that.
Yes. Ron
It's close
the
enough.
Truth. Killings
That works.
are truth.
B+, Evan.
Yeah. Yeah, corrections, omissions, all. Thank you.
That's what I've been telling you, Ben. Just give them all B's.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, teaching's easy.
Yeah.
I
Bees.
still have to grade all those papers. That the quarantine has not relieved me of that burden. But that's okay. I'm glad
No,
to be
no.
good.
No, now you have to grade them even harder because
Yeah,
you
they
don't
don't
have
have an
excuse
excuse
not
not to do the work, except in many cases, I'm sure they do.
Well, I do need to point out, there's this. We are all saying these things like, oh, now we have no excuse not to do this and blah, blah, blah. And I would argue that the crushing knowledge that you're trapped in a cage while society at least changes forever around you, if not collapses in and of itself. I mean, that's a hard thing to get through. I just got through apologizing for not having watched all of the stuff we needed to watch for an episode we did today. Technically, I do not have an excuse outside of the general existential,
except crippling depression.
Like, look, I had to stare at the wall and almost cry for 2 hours today, so I had to carve out time for that myself. I didn't have time to watch the rest of this McFoley stuff.
I empathize.
You'll get to it.
It's just I find that I have like a couple of hours of like a lot of energy during these days when I can get some things done, and then the rest of the time I'm staring at the wall, face down on my bed.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm not staring at the wall. I'm staring at cartoon animals and my cartoon avatar being chased by wasps.
Lots
circles.
of cartoons for sure. I rewatched the entire Metalocalypse, all 3 seasons, and the Clock Opera over the last couple
that stuff's
of weeks.
great.
I have watched 120 some odd episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine in the last
That's a lot.
30 days.
I have watched 6 full seasons of America's Next Top Model.
Whoa.
Well, there's not much substance to it, so you don't really have to pay attention.
Yeah.
It's just Tyra being a narcissist at a bunch of 18-year-old girls.
I watched a couple seasons of that with one of my exes. It wasn't terrible.
That's why she's your ex. It's entertaining if you just keep in mind that Tyra is a complete megalomaniac narcissist the whole time.
I mean, that's the point, right?
That's partially the point, yes.
I forgot, by the way, I have a correction to a couple episodes ago, or something that we omitted, a fact I did not know at the time. So Charlotte Flair, I may have been browsing her Wikipedia while watching her match from the most recent WrestleMania for an upcoming episode. And yes. I did not realize that in addition to being a Flair, in addition to being part of the Lannisters of wrestling, in addition to being a genetic super being and such, she is also in a very elite class of humans in this world, which is people who have fought cops.
Did she fight a cop? I know she's been arrested a couple times. Like, not arrested.
No, she won.
Oh, she got arrested for assault. She got arrested for assaulting a police officer and was supposed to go to jail,
good.
but then just gave it $200.
Did she do wrestling on them?
It did not say. But I will keep you updated on the story. I'm going to dig into this.
If you watch Paw Patrol, Charlotte Flair is actually the main villain of the cartoon.
So yeah, that's what I got.
Nice. I don't know if I don't remember that or I hadn't heard about that incident.
I feel like I did just forgotten about it. It's ringing a bell.
Yeah,
now.
a little bit.
Just like Charlotte rang that cop's bell. Bing.
One thing that I want to talk about that I omitted, not from one of our episodes, but from the lecture I did for the WrestlePosium, because I talked a bit about, and this is related to you guys, Doc and Katie.
Yeah.
I talked about comedy a bunch in relation to wrestling, and for some reason, like I had planned a whole thing to say about extremely serious wrestling, and it just didn't materialize in the final version of the paper. And I was thinking about it, and it really would have made sense to talk about it. So I can talk about it now a bit. For those of you who want to watch the lecture, it is now available on YouTube. If you go to the PWSA, the Pro Wrestling Studies Association YouTube page, it's there. And I just wanted to say so I was talking about audience reactions to stand-up comedy as related to wrestling and so on and so forth. And I think actually more even than stand-up comedy, in improv comedy, the role of the audience is even more important and even closer to that of wrestling. Now, XSW isn't quite improv comedy. It's more like sketch with
it's a little closer,
a little
to
bit of
sketch,
improv
for sure.
Right?
Yeah, it's closer to sketch. There is improv in it.
So the role of the audience, at XSW shows is extremely important, but it's not sort of particular to sketch comedy in general, I think. But it is what is interesting is that the two art forms are close enough together that you can have something like XSW, which is like halfway between wrestling and sketch comedy. So I thought it was
kind of the freedom of like being in sketch comedy where you can just, I don't know, come up with a character, see if it works, and then if it doesn't, you never use it again. You can kind of do that in something like XSW. But XSW is also like wrestling in that there is an overarching narrative. If you introduce something that's happening, if it's not working, you don't necessarily just want to get rid of it. You still want to pay it off. You still want to kind of see it through to some conclusion.
They're still trying to find a way to write off that Doc Diamondfire character.
I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, especially considering there aren't any shows anytime soon.
Right, yes. Job for life.
And Doc, I would actually say that your presence in XSW is kind of interesting to me in terms of how wrestling characters and like sketch comedy characters are related and how they're different from each other. Because in sketch comedy, a character, for the most part, especially nowadays, maybe not as much like in the 70s, but nowadays especially, is a pitch character, is a character you can sum up in a couple sentences and kind of has a joke that they do or like a central comedic conceit to their character.
They call it a gimmick in wrestling. Like I'm not saying that to be humorous. That's exactly what that is. That's a gimmick.
Yes, no, he's right.
It's a gimmick in wrestling. It's a character game in sketch and improv. Same basic idea. But then wrestling also, as I have been learning, also has room for these other characters that are not so easily summed up. For these other characters that are kind of more just like we've talked about, people like channeling spirits, kind of, or just sort of like these characters that are real expressions of themselves that are not necessarily so easily defined or boxed in. And I would argue that you are more in the second category in comparison to a lot of the other XSW characters who are more on the game gimmick side, which is not a disparaging thing at all.
No, not at all.
Every character in XSW is great.
No, I get what you're saying.
Like, as we've talked about a bunch, it's a throwback to the older days of wrestling when more of the characters were like that. I think it's a sort of an unfortunate thing about contemporary wrestling that the characters can be summed up so easily. And they are, like, either they're a gimmick, a total gimmick, or they're not a character at all. They're just some guy. Whereas in the past...
It's just some guy who's angry.
Right, or who's just athletic. In the past, these characters, they showed up on your TV fully formed, and you wondered, like, where did this person come from? And you couldn't imagine them just going home and taking off the costume and being a normal person. And I can't imagine Doc being a normal person, for sure.
No, absolutely not.
You know very well.
It's so hard to get actual heels anymore, like in actual wrestling. Yeah. Whereas when you go to I get what you're saying. You go to XSW, and tell me that you don't want to kick Rich Gladhand in the dick over and over until he's hospitalized.
And I mean, he's my favorite character in XSW, and we hung out at the bar after one of your shows once, and I was telling him, like, dude, I'm sorry, like, I can't help but think of like Rich Gladhand as I'm talking to you.
He's very comfortable with that, actually.
That's legally his name, Richard Gladhand.
Oh, Rich.
It is what? No.
Yeah, it totally is.
Of course it is.
Justin Angermeyer is Justin Angermeyer's real name.
Captain Romance's legal name is actually Captain. He's a war hero.
But to your point, though, Evan, about the difference in these kind of characters in XSW, like, some of it is that I came into XSW already existing. And a lot of it, though, is that the characters in XSW come up through the comedy process. So it really needs that kind of snap to be seen from any audience the first time they see them. And there is something to be said for
you
doing
were not
that
birthed from Mitch's mind jelly.
No. Although he is a creative dude.
It's some potent mind jelly.
It is.
Tis.
It is.
Virile mind jelly, even.
Ew.
I've lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry, dude.
It's all right.
We were supposed to be talking about R-Truth, but I think we got well off track.
Oh, this is about R-Truth?
You were
my
talking
bad.
about how your character compared to the other
right.
characters.
So, but I'm always like, I mean, I'm a funny guy, and I like to talk, and I like to play with an audience, and sometimes in like what would be seen as more like. I hate the phrase like legitimate pro wrestling, because what the hell is legitimate pro wrestling? You know, but a problem I've had in more like legitimate pro wrestling is that there's still so much of this attachment to like olds and norms, and even in very modern situations, there's so much baggage. One of the reasons that wrestlers can have characters that aren't so immediately popping to the eye is that you are definitely going to play the character over time. You can establish a very vanilla blank character, and you can put them on the full wrestling card in a place where they won't get a lot of attention, but the audience will learn their name and know that they're there. And then when something happens to that character, it's a lot more interesting than if it happened to a character they introduced that day. It's putting seasoning on it. You know, if you have a piece of chicken with no seasoning on it, maybe you don't want to eat it, but every chicken has no seasoning on it until you put the seasoning on it. I hope that follows.
And the best wrestling characters, like, you can believe that they leave wrestling and they're still that character. They can be doing a podcast.
Yeah.
They can show up on some TV show as the character. And you're like, oh, it's that guy. Not, oh, it's that dude playing that character.
And you can even change it up for like something more civil. I remember one time when I was a kid, I was watching television in the morning, and I wasn't at school that day for one reason or another. I think I was ill, and I was watching Regis and Kathy Lee. And
I think that was that day you told me about where you had the projectile shitting disease.
No, I didn't get that until I was older. So I was watching Regis and Kathy Lee, and I think I had strep throat. And Shawn Michaels...
Strep
Shawn Michaels and Diesel came on. And like neither of them were particularly over the top, but they were much softened because they knew their job that day wasn't to beat somebody up. It was, hey, go on the television show. They didn't drop character, but what if these characters, instead of threatening people, were making jokes with Regis?
In sharp contrast to the episode where Stone Cold gave the stunner to Kathy Lee right around the time all of the stuff about the child slaves was coming out.
Oh, man, that would have been something. Was Kathy Lee still on the show at that point? I think she was.
Yeah.
That was when it turned out like she had been endorsing sweatshops by accident, right?
Yeah.
Repeatedly.
But by accident, quotation.
On a completely different mark, and I've mentioned this on the show before, check out the Ultimate Warrior on Arsenio Hall, because he's just the Ultimate Warrior. Full screaming crazy.
That was just him.
Yeah, but he knew how to put on a suit and just merely be a shithead instead of putting on all of that stuff and being insane. And Arsenio works with it great. He knew what he was doing.
A couple of things actually about the Truth episode.
Yeah.
So since what we mentioned when we recorded it, I think Riddick Moss was the champion. They did a great little. It's one of the only. I think it's one of the last things they shot before the quarantine was R-Truth. First, a ref drives up in Riddick Moss's neighborhood while he's driving. And it's like, hey, Riddick Moss. And he's like, why are you here?
Yeah,
and
Moss
then,
is jogging at the time, I believe.
He's jogging, yeah. And Truth rolls up in another car behind him and jumps out of the car and rolls him up for the title.
I like that we're just assuming it was filmed before quarantine.
Yeah, I don't know. But then at WrestleMania, Mojo Rawley and then Rob Gronkowski, Gronk, who hosted WrestleMania, won the title. So Gronk is the 24/7 champion now.
I'm just going to point out that Gronk was wearing the same clothes both nights, so I'm just assuming he didn't sleep.
Well, he just stood on that little podium the whole time.
Another thing about Carmella. So she won they won the mixed match challenge, Truth and Carmella. They both got to be number 30 in the Royal Rumble. The payoff for Truth eventually was that U.S. title win that we talked about in the premium episode, because he never got to be in the Battle Royal. Carmella did get a little bit of a push after that because she won the Women's Battle Royal at WrestleMania 35. So she got a little.
Yeah, they like to do a little something with Carmella. They know she's a good character. They know that she's not necessarily the character to be in front of the division, but she might be. They gave it to her for a little while and it worked. They can always.
It worked for as long as it worked, and when it wasn't working anymore, they stopped it.
Right, and part of the reason why it worked is that it was shocking that they gave her the belt instead of the better wrestlers.
And she beat Asuka a bunch of times.
Oh, that's a whole rant I could go into, and I don't want to right now.
What the hell was the name of that guy who she was? James Ellsworth.
No, notorious real life piece of shit, James Ellsworth.
Is that right?
Yeah. Oh, look it up.
I didn't catch that bit of.
Didn't he get caught hitting on teenage girls?
That's just what our friends were telling us at indie shows. Is that?
No. He actually got caught later hitting on.
I trust our friends.
Yeah. No, but I trust our friends too. Our friends said he was just hard to work with and a douchebag, and I trust everyone who said that. It was multiple people saying that.
Right.
So one thing we talked about a little bit in the episode was how the 24/7 title was brought in to make Raw more unpredictable or less predictable. It's interesting. I was talking to some of my students because wrestling comes up sometimes because they all know that I have this podcast and all this stuff. But they were saying that they only watch AEW. They don't watch WWE anymore because WWE is too predictable. And it's
yeah.
I mean, I think AEW is kind of predictable too. I don't know. I think wrestling is kind of predictable, but when wrestling being predictable doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Like if it's too predictable, it's bad. But I think part of what makes NXT so good, or has made NXT so good over the years, is that everything that happens makes sense. So that helps. There's this balance that you have to strike between it being unpredictable and it making sense. Whereas like Vince Russo's style of Crash TV, whether in TNA or latter day WCW or whatever, went way too far on the unpredictable side of the equation. And I think that's worse in some ways.
Oh my God, Vince Russo's WCW.
Are you familiar with TV tropes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, I used to get lost in TV tropes for hours.
So there is kind of an attitude you can see sometimes in pop culture, I guess on Twitter is what I mean by that, but also out in the world where I think people now, we're all so hip now. We're all in the know on how things work, and I feel like a lot of times you see people say, as a criticism of a story, of a book they read, or of a movie they saw, or something like that, they'll say oh, it does these tropes, it has this thing in it, and I'm so tired of this trope. And there is, to a certain degree, obviously, you should be creative and you should try to vary what kind of stories you tell and how you tell them and stuff. But yeah, at the end of the day, it does often feel like there's only so many things that can happen in a given dramatic tension situation. There's only so many permutations of things, and inevitably you're going to repeat it, right? And that should not
definitely
be an inherently bad thing.
The babyface is going to make a comeback because the crowd gets behind them. And that works, that's just, it's a formula for a reason. You can mess with the formula at points, but those changes, that unpredictability only works against a backdrop of predictability.
Well, in wrestling especially, but certainly not exclusively, it's a lot less about the story that the booker is telling and a lot more about how effectively the company has made you care about the characters in the first place. If you care about the characters enough, there doesn't have to be any more of a story other than these two characters I care about are going to fight. Man, I wonder who's going to win.
At the same time, I think a lot of fans complain about things that happen when it's not predictable enough because they had their idea of how it was going to go. And then when it goes differently, they're disappointed that they weren't right. And so they assume that that means that it's bad.
You can't please wrestling fans
most of the
time because of stuff like that, you know, and everybody's a booker these days. And like, if what they get out of wrestling is just complaining about it, I mean, they're free to do that, but I don't really see the point.
I mean, that's still heat, right?
Yeah.
Like if people are watching it and hating it, like that still works in terms of the wrestling rules.
There is a specific problem with that has revealed itself over the years, and that the attitude for a long time with people like within the WWE was, well, we have these fans that whether they like us or don't like us, they're going to watch us. We have like the nut of hardcore fans. And it's been proven over the years that they'll complain about us and keep watching. And that's all well and good, but that's been what they've been saying for almost 20 years. And in almost all of the last 20 years, their popularity has ticked down a bit and a bit and a bit to where it's become very noticeable that over time, a lot of these fans are dropping off.
And not just that, their demographic is skewing older and older, and they're not bringing in the new younger fans, which AEW is, if you actually look at the demographic breakdowns. NXT is as well, but like Raw and SmackDown, like their demographic, if Doc can correct me.
No,
if
you're absolutely right.
older.
A lot of their fans, the reason that they laud the Attitude Era so much still on their television is because a lot of the fans they have are the same people that have just been watching since then. The people that haven't at any point in the last 20 years decided to stop because they didn't like an angle or the show got boring or whatever, which at this point is like 2/3 of them.
And they created this strategy recently where all of this heat, as Evan pointed out, is directed at the booking, at the company.
Right.
And so they create this sort of character of the authority that kind of represents the booking. And that's what the big heel is. And that works for a little while. Like it worked when Daniel Bryan was on the rise or whatever, but it gets fucking boring after a while. When, you know, the big villain isn't actually a character. It's like the piece of entertainment or art that you're consuming itself is the thing that you're supposed to hate. Like that doesn't really work.
So you might as well just not watch it.
Yeah.
That's and AEW's not
especially
doing
if you have
that.
alternatives.
Yeah, now that there's real alternatives, that becomes a bigger problem.
Do we have some wrapping up thoughts?
One last thing. This is something I meant to talk about a little while ago. So, but a couple of times I mentioned that the WWE wrestling without an audience is like, robots continuing to act out their programming after humanity has been decimated. One of our Twitter followers, listener and fellow podcaster at Space King Bobby.
Hi, Bobby.
Oh, yes, Bobby.
Pointed out that if there were a story or a movie about that, it should be called There Will Come Soft Pains, which is a reference to the Ray Bradbury story, There Will Come Soft Rains, about that kind of situation. I'm not sure if I've said this before, but I figured since it's in the episode this week, I'd mention it again. So thanks, Bobby, for your support.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thanks
you.
for your continued support, man. He listens to our show all the time. As far as other wrapping up stuff goes, R-Truth is great. I was really happy we decided to do some episodes about him. I was thinking about it. I think he may be like in my mind and tell me if you have any other thoughts on this. I think he's the second most underrated wrestler of the last 20 years, other than Homicide. Homicide never even got signed by the WWE.
That's a good point.
Yeah, Homicide, in my mind, is clearly the most underrated wrestler of the last 20 years.
Can make a
but
case
I think
for
Truth may be number 2.
Yeah, can make a case for Amazing Red, but he's starting to get his due now.
Yes, Red's starting to get his due. Where Red wasn't consistent all this time. But
badly timed injuries, and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's what I got. Everybody, please stay safe. If you're sitting around listening to us and you like us, we still have a Patreon. For $5 a month, we have an extra episode every week, usually a companion piece to whatever episode we're doing. There's a lot of good stuff on there, and we're continuing to record.
Do not fall into the traps of overpriced ocean lofts. The dolphins will kill you.
Yes, as
That's
always.
That's been a big problem lately, especially because they are more assertive because they feel that the humanity is now on the decline, so they're seizing power where they can.
This is true. They have taken over the Venice canals.
Yeah, the dolphins are aiming for that number 1 species slot, and I truly believe that if we do not keep their eye on them and try to invade their territory by building glass ocean lofts, we will die, and they will usurp us.
I'm ready to just submit to our dolphin overlords.
Snorky talk man.
You know who agrees with you?
Who?
A majority of scientists.
And you know who agrees with you? Dolphins.
Stay out of the ocean, everybody. Stay out of the ocean.
Also on our Patreon, if you want to support us, but you don't want to go full $5 because you got your reasons. We're not here. Nobody's here to judge anybody. You can give us $1 a month, and you don't get the premium episodes, but you do get access to the main feed episodes a couple weeks in advance.
Yeah, and Doc still does not have an OnlyFans, but I do hear Evan is working on one.
I have a mostly fans, which is 80% for people who want to see my butt and 20% for people who want to tell me my butt is not good.
I think that's a regular Twitter page.
That's okay.
Yeah, where you put pictures of your butt on.
Stay out of the ocean.
Yes, please do. Stay out of the ocean. Follow us on Twitter at ContestingW. This has been Contesting Wrestling. We love you.
Bye.